When I heard the creak of the floorboards outside my son's room for the third night in a row, something deep inside me told me sleep wasn't coming back. At first, I thought it was the wind. Our old house had its own rhythm, with settling, windows sighing in the middle of the night. But this sound was different. It was careful, human, and it always stopped right outside Ethan's door. My husband, Michael, wasn't supposed to be awake at that hour. He had always been a heavy sleeper, the kind who could rest through thunderstorms and late-night feedings. But lately, his footsteps seemed to wander when he thought I was asleep. That night, I kept my eyes open long after the sound faded. A mother's intuition doesn't need proof, it needs only a pattern. And I had started seeing small, unsettling things that didn't make sense until they began to overlap. The next morning, I watched Michael pour coffee in his usual quiet way. He smiled faintly, like always, and kissed my cheek before heading to work. Nothing seemed wrong. And yet, the image of a shadow pausing by our son's room at midnight refused to leave my mind. I wanted to believe it was harmless. Maybe he was checking if Ethan had kicked off his blanket. Maybe he'd heard a noise. But the timing, every night, around the same hour, always after midnight. And the next day, Ethan seemed a little more tired, a little more distant. That was the beginning of my sleepless nights, and of the slow unraveling of the family I thought I knew. Life before that was ordinary in the softest way. Michael and I had been married for 11 years. He was a history teacher at the local high school, a quiet man who loved his books, his garden, and his evening news. I worked part-time at a floral shop downtown. We weren't perfect, but we were steady. That's what I used to tell people, steady. Ethan was 7 then. The kind of child who laughed easily, who built Lego castles on the living room floor, and told me stories about dragons that protected their mothers. He was our miracle baby after 3 miscarriages, and sometimes, even now, I'd still catch myself watching him breathe, grateful that he existed. Our home was small but full of warm, lavender-scented laundry, Sunday pancakes, the faint hum of Michael's classical music drifting from his study. I used to think happiness sounded like that, soft and unassuming. But in every story, there's a moment when what you thought was safe begins to feel strange. For me, it began when Ethan stopped laughing during breakfast. It was a Thursday. He sat across from me, his cereal spoon untouched, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth pattern as if he was counting stitches. When I asked if he was feeling sick, he just shook his head and whispered, "I'm fine, Mommy." His voice was too quiet for morning. That night, I told Michael about it as we got ready for bed. He shrugged, saying kids have moods. "Maybe he's just tired from school," he said, sliding under the blanket. "Don't overthink it, Claire." But I did. Mothers always do. Over the next week, I noticed Ethan waking up with dark circles under his eyes. He started avoiding bedtime, asking to sleep with a light on. One night, he even cried when I told him it was time for bed. He clung to my arm and whispered, "Can't you stay for a bit, Mommy?" I sat by his bed, stroking his hair until his breathing evened out. But an hour later, when I checked again, his light was off, and I could have sworn I heard whispering from the hallway. I told myself I was being paranoid. That was easier than facing the alternative. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch while I was folding laundry. Michael was outside trimming the hedges. When I bent to pick up Ethan's blanket, I saw something strange. 2 small crescent-shaped bruises along his forearm. Not deep, but fresh. "Ethan, honey," I said softly, touching his arm. "Where did you get these?" He stirred, blinked groggily, and whispered, "I don't know." His voice carried that same tremble I'd been hearing lately, the kind that sits in your throat like a secret. When Michael came back inside, I showed him. He looked genuinely surprised. "Maybe he fell during recess," he said quickly. "You know how rough kids play." But something about the way his eyes flickered, not with guilt, but with control, made my stomach twist, like he was already choosing how the story should sound. That night, the sound came again, footsteps outside Ethan's door. And this time, I got up, barefoot, careful not to let the floor creak. I followed the faint light under our bedroom door. I stopped at the end of the hallway, heart hammering. The door to Ethan's room was half open, and inside, I saw Michael's shadow bending over our son's bed. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to step forward, to ask what he was doing, but my body froze, anchored by confusion. Then Michael turned, closed the door softly, and walked back toward our room. When he slid into bed, I pretended to be asleep, but my pulse wouldn't slow. His breathing grew, steady beside me, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. And that was when I knew, whatever he was doing, he didn't want me to see it. The next morning, I smiled as usual, packed Ethan's lunch, and waved goodbye to Michael. But inside, I was no longer the same woman. A quiet decision had been made. If the truth wouldn't come to me, I would find it myself. And that's how I ended up standing in the electronics aisle 2 days later, staring at a tiny black camera no bigger than my thumb. I held the tiny black box in my palm for a long time before paying for it. It was lighter than I expected, like holding a secret. The young man behind the counter didn't ask many questions. He just smiled politely and said, "Good choice, ma'am. Works well for monitoring nannies or pets." I nodded, pretending that was what I needed it for. I couldn't bring myself to say the truth, that I was buying a hidden camera to watch my own husband. On the drive home, I kept rehearsing excuses in my head. If Michael found it, what would I say? That I was being overprotective? That I worried too much about Ethan? Every justification sounded ridiculous, but not knowing was worse than feeling foolish. When I pulled into the driveway, Michael's car wasn't there. He had gone to pick up groceries. Ethan was in his room reading. intimidating. His door was open, just a crack, enough for me to hear the faint hum of his favorite cartoon soundtrack playing from his tablet. I tiptoed in and smiled. "Hey, sweetheart, Mommy just needs to tidy up your shelves, okay?" He nodded without looking up, absorbed in his story. I scanned the room, the bookshelf, the nightstand, the curtain rod. The camera had to see everything, but also remain invisible. Finally, I found the perfect spot between the stuffed giraffe and a stack of bedtime storybooks. The camera's lens was disguised as a black button, impossible to notice unless you knew where to look. When I finished setting it up, I turned to my son. "Ethan, do you like having your night light on?" I asked casually. "Yeah, I get scared when it's dark." I knelt beside him. "What makes you scared, baby?" He hesitated. His lips parted, then closed again. "Just sounds," he whispered. The word sounds lingered in my chest like a stone. That evening, I checked the feed on my phone. It worked perfectly. A clear, wide view of Ethan's bed and half the room. I told myself it was only for one night. One night to prove my imagination wrong. But deep down, I already knew I wasn't imagining things. Michael came home in his usual unhurried way. The smell of rain clung to his jacket, and he smiled when he saw me cooking. "Smells good," he said, kissing my forehead. "You always know how to make this place feel like home." For a moment, I wanted to believe him again. To believe that he was still the man who once brought me daisies every Friday, who cried the first time he held our son. But trust, once cracked, doesn't sound the same. Every word he spoke had a faint echo now, like something hollow behind the surface. After dinner, Michael offered to tuck Ethan in. "You've been working all day, Claire." "I'll do it," he said gently. He kissed me goodnight and walked down the hall. I stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes with trembling hands, counting the seconds. 10 minutes passed, 15. When I finally checked my phone, the live feed blinked to life. Michael sat on the edge of Ethan's bed. At first, it looked innocent, a father checking on his child. He brushed Ethan's hair and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he reached for the blanket and adjusted it, not tenderly, but with a kind of mechanical precision, smoothing it over and over as if following a routine. Ethan's eyes stayed wide open. He wasn't asleep. My breath caught when Michael leaned close, his mouth near our son's ear. Ethan's body stiffened. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw fear. Pure, silent fear. A few minutes later, Michael left the room and turned off the light. Ethan sat up immediately, eyes darting toward the door, his chest rising fast. He pulled a stuffed giraffe close and whispered something into its ear. I felt my knees give way. I slid to the floor beside the counter and pressed a shaking hand against my mouth. It wasn't proof of harm, not yet, but it was enough to tell me something was deeply wrong. When Michael came back to bed, I was facing the wall, pretending to sleep again. His arms slit around my waist, warm and heavy. "You're cold," he murmured. I didn't answer. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I watched the camera replay over and over until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. The next day, I studied every moment like a detective. I slowed down the footage, searching for clues. There were no obvious signs of violence, no shouting, no hitting, just tension, just fear. Michael's voice, faint through the static, said something like, "You remember what we talked about, right?" Ethan nodded, barely breathing. "Good boy." That was it. Those two words, "good boy," hit me like a knife. They sounded like control, not affection. I spent the whole day moving through the house in a daze. My hands folded laundry, but my mind kept replaying that scene. I watched Michael laugh with Ethan over dinner, help him with his homework, tell him stories before bed, all the gestures of a loving father. Yet I could see the flinch behind Ethan's smile, the way he avoided eye contact, the way his shoulders tensed when Michael stood too close. By the end of the week, the camera had recorded 3 more nights just like that. No violence, but something colder, conditioning. Words whispered in the dark. I could only catch fragments. "Don't tell Mom. We don't talk about this. You're my special one." Each phrase carved a hollow in my heart. It wasn't physical harm I was seeing. It was something that eats slower, quieter. Something that shapes fear into obedience. On the 4th night, I made a decision. If he wouldn't stop, I would confront him. But I needed to be sure. That night, I kept the app open on my phone and sat on the living room couch, pretending to read. The clock ticked past midnight. Then, the screen came to life again. Michael walked into Ethan's room, soft-footed as always. He sat on the bed, whispered something, and reached under the blanket. I dropped my phone. My pulse thundered in my ears. I didn't need to see more. I stood up and ran to the hallway. For the first time, I didn't care about proof. I opened the door, and the look on Michael's face when the light flooded the room was something I'll never forget. When I pushed open Ethan's door that night, the light from the hallway spilled across the carpet in a soft rectangle. Michael froze at the edge of the bed. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other, husband and wife, caught in a silence that weighed more than words. "Claire," he started, his voice low, measured. "You're awake. I heard you again," I said, my hand still on the doorknob. "What are you doing in here, Michael?" Ethan stirred beneath the blanket, confused. "Mom," he murmured. Michael straightened. "It's okay, buddy. Go back to sleep." But Ethan didn't close his eyes. He looked at me with a mixture of relief and fear that made my chest tighten. I had a nightmare," Michael said quickly. He called out for me. I was just checking on him. It could have sounded believable, if not for the way his hand shook slightly when he reached to smooth the blanket. I glanced at my son. "Did you call him sweetheart?" Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. Michael's jaw tensed. He probably doesn't remember. I didn't answer. Instead, I crossed the room, brushed Ethan's hair, and whispered, "It's all right, baby. I'll stay for a bit." Michael Michael stepped back, expression unreadable. "I'll wait in our room." He left before I could respond. I sat beside my son until his breathing slowed again, then turned off the lamp and went to face the man waiting for me in the dark. Michael was sitting on the edge of our bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. When I entered, he didn't look up. "What's going on?" I asked quietly. He exhaled through his nose. "You've been spying on me, haven't you?" My stomach dropped. "So you knew." He turned toward me, eyes tired but sharp. I saw the little lens on the shelf. "You think I wouldn't notice?" The air between us tightened. "I had to know what you were doing," I said. "Every night, you go into his room. You whisper things." He scared Michael. His shoulders stiffened. "Because you made him scared. You filled his head with your paranoia." "That's not true," I said. "He flinches when you walk past him." Michael ran a hand over his face, the mask of patience slipping. "You don't understand. I was helping him." "Helping?" I repeated. He nodded, too quickly. "He's been anxious since the divorce talk started." The words hit me like a slap. "Divorce talk?" Michael finally met my eyes. "You were going to leave, Claire. I saw the messages to your sister. How you said you were tired. How you couldn't keep pretending. So I've been trying to prepare Ethan, to make him see that if you go, he'll still have me." For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. "You've been sneaking into his room at night to tell him I might leave?" "I wanted him to hear it gently," he said, defensive now. "You would have done it all at once." Broken him. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "You told him I was abandoning him." Michael's silence answered me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling. "You've been planting fear in our son." That's what those whispers were. Not comfort, but stories to turn him against me. "He deserves to know the truth," Michael said, his tone hardening. "You're the one who checked out of this marriage years ago." The tears came then, not loud, just the quiet kind that blur everything. "You could have talked to me. Instead, you used him." Michael rose, pacing. "I was trying to protect him from your instability." I stared at him, realizing how far we had drifted from the people we used to be. There were no monsters in our home, only choices that twisted into something unrecognizable. That night, after he fell asleep on the couch, I went to Ethan's room and crawled into bed beside him. He stirred and whispered, "Mommy, are you staying?" "Yes, sweetheart. I'm right here." He pressed his face against my shoulder and sighed. I lay awake listening to the rain tapping against the window, wondering when love had turned into strategy, when comfort had become control. By morning, I had made a decision. The camera had done its job. Now it was time for the truth to breathe in daylight. I woke before sunrise, the house still in gray. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm, as if my mind had finally chosen a side. Ethan was still sleeping, his small hand resting on the blanket, peaceful for once. I kissed his forehead and went to the kitchen to make coffee, the ritual steadying me. Michael walked in half an hour later, rubbing his neck. "You're up early." "I didn't sleep much," I said. He poured himself a cup without asking, the air between us thick with everything left unsaid. "I'm taking Ethan to my sister's today," I said. "We both need a break." He looked up sharply. "Your sister?" "Claire, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. I want him somewhere quiet for a while." He started to argue, then stopped. "You'll tell her lies about me." I met his eyes. "I won't have to say much. The truth speaks loudly enough." Later that morning, while Michael was in the shower, I opened my laptop and pulled up the hidden camera recordings. I watched just enough to confirm what I already knew. The late-night visits, the whispered warnings about me, the emotional pull that had made our son shrink inside himself. It was all there, subtle, deliberate, real. I transferred the clips onto a flash drive and slipped it into my purse. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity. When Michael came out, towel around his shoulders, he caught me packing Ethan's backpack. "You're really leaving?" "For a few days," I said evenly, "to give us space to think." He frowned. "You're making a mistake, Claire." "Maybe, but at least it'll be mine to make." He didn't stop me. He just watched from the porch as I buckled Ethan into the car. His expression wasn't anger. It was something smaller, lonelier, and for a brief second, I almost pitied him. Almost. At my sister Anna's house, the walls smelled of cinnamon and baby shampoo. Her youngest was still learning to walk, filling the air with giggles that felt like sunlight. "You look exhausted," Anna said, hugging me. "I am," I admitted, "but I'm here now." While Ethan played with his cousins, I told her everything. The footsteps, the whispers, the camera, the truth about what Michael had been saying at night. Anna listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening. "That's not just manipulation, Claire. That's cruelty." "I don't want a war," I said quietly. "I just want Ethan to stop being afraid." Anna reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then you start by telling the right people. School counselor, family therapist. Let them help." It sounded simple when she said it, but my chest ached at the thought of turning our private pain into something official. Still, that evening I made the call. I set up a meeting with a school counselor for the next day. I told Ethan we talked to someone who helps families talk better. He nodded slowly, trusting me the way children do when they sense the storm is finally passing. That night, after everyone went to bed, my phone buzzed with a message from Michael. "I'm sorry for how I handle things. I just wanted to keep him close. Please come home tomorrow. We can fix this." I read it twice, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I set the phone down. Some apologies arrived too late, when the damage has already learned how to speak for itself. The next morning, sitting in the counselor's office, Ethan clutched my hand. The counselor, a kind woman named Mrs. Parker, spoke softly, asking simple questions about school, about sleep, about what makes him happy. When she asked, "Do you ever worry at night?" Ethan's lip trembled. "Only Only when Dad says Mommy might go away. My eyes stung, but I stay quiet. Mrs. Parker nodded gently. You know, sometimes parents say things when they're scared too, but it's never your job to fix their fears. Ethan looked up at me, searching my face for confirmation. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. He smiled faintly and leaned against my arm. That small smile, that was the first step toward healing. Over the following weeks, I built a new rhythm. Mornings at Anna's, therapy sessions twice a week, long walks with Ethan in the park. We talked about everything except the nights. Slowly, his shoulders lifted, his laughter returned. He started drawing again, pictures of trees and trains and sometimes of us holding hands. Michael called a few times, always calm, always measured. We need to talk about the future, he'd say. And I would answer, we will, but not until Ethan feels safe again. Behind those words was another truth. I needed to feel safe too. 2 months later, I met him at a cafe halfway between our homes. He looked smaller somehow, the confidence gone from his posture. I've been seeing a therapist, he said, stirring his coffee. They say I was trying to control what I was afraid to lose. I nodded. And what did you lose? He sighed. You. Him. The version of me that thought love meant ownership. For the first time in a long while, he sounded honest. And for that, I was grateful. I'm not angry anymore, I said. But I can't go back. He nodded slowly. I know. We talked about visitation schedules, school pickups, counseling, practical things, ordinary things. And when we left, he said softly, thank you for taking care of him when I didn't know how. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. That evening, back at Anna's, I sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. Ethan came out with a glass of lemonade and sat beside me. Mom! Yes, love! Are we happy now? The question made me smile. We're getting there, I said. Happiness takes practice. He nodded thoughtfully and leaned his head on my arm. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Life had softened again, in small, steady ways. News of what had happened spread in the quiet, sideways way small towns specialize in. Nobody said my name outright, but I could feel it in the glances at the grocery store, in the pauses that hung too long at the school gate. People sense when a family has cracked, even if they don't know where the fault line runs. At first, I wanted to hide, but the counselor, Mrs. Parker, told me something that changed my mind. Secrets grow in silence, Claire. Healing needs air. So I began speaking honestly, just enough. When neighbors asked how we were, I said, Ethan and I are getting stronger. No drama, no whispering, just truth in small doses. And to my surprise, most people met it with kindness. At the school's spring fair, I saw Michael for the first time since that cafe meeting. He stood by the ring toss booth, watching Ethan help a friend stack prizes. When our eyes met, he gave a nervous half smile and a little wave. I walked over. He looks happy, Michael said quietly. He is, I replied. He still talks about your history stories. You can tell he misses that part of you. He nodded, swallowing hard. I'm trying to earn back trust. I joined a support group for parents who, he stopped himself, who are learning to listen better. For a moment, I saw the man I'd once married stripped of excuses. Maybe redemption doesn't arrive as a grand gesture, but as a small effort repeated every day. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Parker invited us to a family session, Michael included. I hesitated, but Ethan wanted to go. In the softly lit room, our son sat between us, fidgeting with a rubber band. Ethan, Mrs. Parker said gently, what do you want to say to your dad today? He looked at his shoes. I didn't like when you said Mom was leaving. I thought it was my fault. Michael's eyes filled instantly. It was never your fault. I was scared, and I made a terrible mistake. Ethan nodded, but didn't speak again. He simply leaned toward me, and I put an arm around him. Mrs. Parker smiled. That's enough for today. Sometimes healing is just everyone sitting in the same room without lies. The following Sunday, my sister hosted a family lunch. Sunlight poured through the windows. Someone's playlist hummed softly in the background. My nieces ran through the kitchen chasing bubbles, while Ethan laughed from the porch swing. Anna poured me coffee. You look lighter, she said. I think I finally stopped waiting for an apology to feel like closure. She nodded knowingly. That's when real forgiveness starts. The kind that's for you, not them. I thought of Michael then, not with bitterness, but with a sad understanding that love can turn clumsy when people try to cage it instead of nurture it. A month later, I stood at Ethan's school assembly as he received an award for kindness. When his teacher read his essay aloud, my throat tightened. Kindness means telling the truth even when it's hard, because truth makes people safe. The room blurred for a second. When the applause began, Ethan found me in the crowd and smiled. It wasn't the big, carefree grin of a child untouched by pain, but it was genuine, steady. It was hope. That night, as I tucked him in, he asked, Mom, will Dad come to my game next week? Yes, I said. He will, and we'll both cheer for you. He yawned, satisfied. Okay, then everything's better. When he fell asleep, I lingered by the door, watching the slow rise and fall of his breathing. There was a time when that sight filled me with fear. Now it filled me with peace. Life didn't return to what it was before. It became something quieter and truer. Michael kept his distance, respecting the boundaries we'd drawn. Sometimes he sent short messages. Ethan did great today. Thanks for the updates. I answered politely, never unkindly. I learned that peace doesn't always come with reconciliation. Sometimes it simply means no longer waiting for chaos to knock at your door. By summer, the house finally sounded different. No more late night footsteps, no whispered arguments, no air thick with things we wouldn't say. Just a gentle gentle hum of the ceiling fan, the soft click of the kettle, and Ethan's voice drifting from his room as he practiced reading out loud. It was the kind of peace that doesn't arrive with fireworks. It tiptoes in, looks around to see if it's welcome, and then settles quietly in the corners. I had moved back into our old home after months at Anna's, not because I wanted to reclaim the past, but because it felt right to reclaim my space. I repainted the walls, lighter this time, a color that made the rooms breathe again. Ethan chose bright blue for his, like the ocean, he said. Every brush stroke felt like erasing a shadow. Michael visited on weekends, supervised at first, then gradually alone. Their time together was structured. Games, walks, homework help. No bedtime talks, no whispered guilt. Just father and son, learning each other all over again under sunlight, not secrecy. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I started working more hours at the floral shop. People came in for weddings, birthdays, apologies, little pieces of human emotion wrapped in ribbons. Once, while arranging lilies, I realized I hadn't thought about the camera in weeks. That small, fearful version of me, the one who had crouched by the hallway clutching her phone, felt like someone I used to know, not someone I still was. Mrs. Parker had been right. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without trembling. One afternoon, Ethan came home from school holding a drawing. It showed 3 stick figures, one tall with brown hair, one smaller with short hair, and one standing between them with a bright yellow sun overhead. "That's you, me, and Dad," he explained. "We're at the park." I smiled. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. See the sun," he said proudly. "It's big so it touches everyone. That way nobody feels cold." I hugged him tightly. There was no better explanation of forgiveness than that. Warmth large enough for everyone, even those who had caused the winter. By autumn, I had learned how to live without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Some evenings, I still thought about the version of our marriage that could have been saved. The one where we talked before we accused, where fear didn't wear the mask of protection. But regret, I realized, is just love that stayed too long in the wrong room. And I had finally walked out. Michael called one evening near the end of September. "Ethan told me you're helping with the fall fair," he said. "You always did love that." "I do," I replied. "It feels good to do something simple again." There was a pause, and then his voice softened. "Claire, I'm glad you're okay." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. When we hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just stood at the window, watching leaves fall like quiet confessions, and felt steady. Ethan's laughter filled the living room later that night as he built another Lego tower. "Mom," he said suddenly, "remember when you said happiness takes practice?" "Yes," he grinned. "I think we're getting really good at it." I laughed. The sound felt clean, uncomplicated. "Yeah," I said, "I think we are." The camera, the secrets, the fear, they had all been about seeing what was hidden. But true sight, I realized, wasn't about spying or proof. It was about recognizing what love is not. It is not control, not silence, not fear disguised as care. Love is a room that lets everyone breathe. And that's the kind of home I wanted to build for my son. When I look back now, I realize the hardest part wasn't discovering the truth. It was learning how to live gently after it. Anger feels powerful at first, but peace is the real strength. It asks you to unclench your fists, to stop searching for why someone hurt you, and instead build a life where no one gets to hold that kind of power again. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that love without honesty becomes a quiet kind of cage. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is open the door and step into the unknown light for yourself and for the ones who trust you to lead them out. I still believe in forgiveness, but not the kind that invites pain back in. Forgiveness, to me, is walking away without bitterness, knowing you gave your best, and choosing to let the rest fall away like autumn leaves. Ethan still asks about his father, and when he does, I tell him, "Your dad is learning too. We all are." Because that's the truth. None of us are finished stories. We're all just trying to write better endings. So tell me, have you ever had to choose peace over being right? Would you have done what I did? If my story touched your heart, stay with me for the next one. And remember, no matter how dark the night gets, light always finds its way through a small, open door.